Hi everyone, it's Jesse Drever here from Leisure Networks. Firstly, I wish to begin by acknowledging the Wadawurrung people of the Kulin Nations, the traditional owners of the land on which I'm presenting from tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land you're listening in from, and I wish to pay respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. To give you a bit of background on Leisure Networks and what we do, we're a regional sports assembly operating in the Barwon region, and we work closely with partners in metropolitan Melbourne. We provide volunteer support, training and development opportunities to local clubs, and we also support work by the community sport and recreation sector to create inclusive opportunities for people with a disability as a registered NDIS provider. We've said it a few times throughout the series, but we're really excited to partner with the City of Monash for this club development program and acknowledge the investment made by the City of Monash to upskill their club volunteers and members of the community. So this session tonight is the third in our financial stream in the City of Monash Club Development Program. The first was Financial Management 101, delivered on the 14th of October. The second, Financial Sustainability, on the 28th of October. And notably, both those sessions were delivered by our partner, More Australia. And tonight's session show us the money around sponsorship. We will note that the first two sessions were also recorded, so if you haven't yet had a chance to have a look, then we'd highly recommend going back and watching those first two sessions in the series delivered by the team at More Australia. In terms of a session plan as to what we're going to cover as part of tonight's content, it's twofold. What we're going to do is we're going to look at how to access sponsorship dollars and really importantly, keep your sponsors happy. I think COVID's really been a big reminder of this because obviously it hasn't kind of discriminated against kind of any one particular industry in particular. That sports obviously been massively affected, but so have businesses that have typically sponsored sport. So it's really more important now more than ever to really create mutual benefit through sponsorships. And obviously the second part of it as well is that once you've got your sponsors, how do you really look after them and as I said, keep them happy? So firstly, tonight we're going to have a look at what sponsorship effectively is. And when we look at this definition, it's really what sponsorship is now rather than potentially what it might have been in the past. I think previously, especially in community sport, sponsorship was really around businesses really giving money and potentially not always really even seeing or potentially sometimes even caring what the benefits were that flowed from that. They just wanted to, they had some kind of connection with community sports clubs. But look, as I touched on briefly in the previous slide, especially as a result of COVID, we've seen that there really needs to be benefits going both ways because those businesses that have sponsored sporting clubs in the past have also been really dramatically impacted by COVID. So they really need to see that they are getting some return from investment on the cash that they're providing sporting clubs. So that's what we've noted as part of the first element of this definition is that it's really a business deal between two parties where both parties benefit from the arrangement. It's also important to note that sponsorship, especially of community sporting clubs, isn't an obligation of businesses. It's just because you run a business doesn't mean that you then need to flow some of your important resources into other community organisations. So that's something that really needs to be kept in mind for community sport is that you really need to show what the benefits that you can offer to businesses rather than just say, well, look, we're a community club. We expect you to, at some point, look to put cash into us. As we said, we touched on, there needs to be benefits going both ways. They need to see that there is actual real value if they are going to invest in a sporting club in terms of providing sponsorship. And flowing from that and making the most of your sponsorship arrangements and ensuring that you can get those really key sponsors in the door is really having some thought through planning and careful attention to your sponsorship arrangements. We also wanted to list what we see as some of the common challenges within sponsorship arrangements within community sport. So firstly, relying on the same internal people, and this can be from two different angles. So firstly, relying on the same people from a management of sponsors perspective, and also if we see it really commonplace within sport is that internal people actually can also be sponsors of your club. So that they're involved with the club for a variety of reasons, whether that's participation, whether it's their parents of participants. They might have even been brought in the door because they were sponsors previously and now they've just got a real inbuilt connection with the club. But they're business people as well, so that they might also sponsor the club through their businesses. Obviously, the challenge that can come from both those different arrangements, if they are the managers of the sponsorship arrangements you've got in place, if they walk out the door, and they're the ones that have the key relationships, that can lead to risks that if they leave, that those relationships aren't maintained with other people in the club, and you can see a drop off in sponsors. And in terms of using internal people for your sponsors, especially in the cases where you might only have a few sponsors, so you rely so heavily on those. If you have a falling out, or for whatever reason they leave the club, if you don't have that diversity, or you don't have kind of businesses that are still ingrained within the general community, that can leave a massive hole in terms of the funds. Another big challenge that we see is leaving that kind of sponsorship approach too late. So you are potentially getting to the start of your season, you realise you've got a shortfall in funds in a particular area. That might be because you've exhausted all your participation funnels, and you've fallen short in that area. So you then naturally turn to sponsorship to fill that void. If you do leave it too late and you've only given yourself a short period of time to really cover those costs, chances are that you won't have the time to put together a really detailed sponsorship proposal, and you mightn't have that success rate in terms of actually getting sponsors in the door. A really big one, and it's going to come through in a lot of the content we discussed tonight, is record keeping and the importance of record keeping. If you have poor records, and whether that's from the contacts of your current sponsors, whether that's of understanding what the assets that you have as a club that you can sell, and also from the perspective of potential future sponsors, and having, again, the funnel of potential future sponsors coming in the door, you run the risk of things falling through the cracks in each of those different areas, which can be a massive risk to the club. There's a couple of other different areas that we touch on within here. Obviously, cold calling. It's a big challenge, and sometimes we see this, the clubs that have no alternative but to cold call, because they don't have the time or resources to really invest in building up some goodwill with potential sponsors. So they have to just approach them cold and say, would you be willing to invest funds? The risk of that obviously is that they don't potentially understand who you stand for as a club, or what you stand for as a club, and the benefits they can see. So that's where there is a real advantage in building that relationship before you then ask for them to potentially invest in your club. Using a one-size-fits-all approach, that can be a real challenge, because not all sponsors want the same thing. And we're going to go into a bit more detail later as to what some specific sponsors might be after. But if you're looking to use the same approach, you potentially aren't fitting what they're looking to get out of a sponsorship arrangement. So they might look at that and think, oh, that's not what we want, and they don't look to invest. So if you have got that ability to tailor it, and you have got that time and the resources within the club to spend some time putting together a proposal, that's where you can be more tailored in your approach, and again, increase your chances of being successful. This is a big one that we've seen, and I'm going to touch on as an example shortly. Sponsors not fitting club values, and I think COVID's been another reminder of that for most clubs, any money in the door is going to be so important to making sure you continue to operate. But moving forward, once you do hopefully bounce forward out of COVID, you can look to be a bit more strategic and selective in terms of the sponsors that you look to target and the sponsors that you bring in the door. So you want to make sure that the sponsors that you have fit who you represent as a club, because you don't want to have them having competing interests, because that can be a poor look for your club. There are a range of different other ones here. Mates rates, you see that you might just offer sponsorship for, it might be a really important sponsorship asset that you have as a club, but because someone's always sponsored it, you give them mate rates. And what might be a $2,000 sponsorship that you can offer is you give it to someone for $500. So you've got that $1,500 shortfall in terms of what you could offer, just because you're working on that kind of mates rates basis. Retention as well, really important one. Especially from the perspective of, if you're putting valuable time and resources from a volunteer perspective into securing sponsors in the first place, if you then don't have retention strategies, or you don't have the ability to really look after your sponsors and they walk out the door, a lot of that work that you've put in the first place is wasted in a sense. Obviously, you've got that potential 12-month period of funds that have invested, but if you could have put the same time and resources and then put some efforts into keeping that sponsor to turn them into a 2, 3, 4 year sponsorship arrangement, you don't then have to go back to the well in terms of finding new sponsors. Or you can go back to the well, but not in terms of retaining those current sponsors. You can put all your time and effort into finding new sponsors to keep building on it. I don't know about all you listening in, but I have definitely got hooked on Ted Lasso, obviously a fairly popular show recently. And within that show, there was a good example of one of those challenges I touched on before in terms of sharing the same values with your sponsors. So for those that saw the episode, Dubai Air, obviously a fictional airline, some of their operations or activities were unethical, but for a kind of a lower tier club, it was such a huge financial investment that they made into the club that there was that real dilemma as to, okay, well, how much do we value that the money that's coming in versus who do we want to be seen to be tied with as a club? So that it was led by the players, supported by the club, that they made a stance to say, no, we don't stand for what that business stands for. We want to be known as this going forward. Obviously, it was a big sacrifice in terms of the funds going out, but potentially going forwards, they might open themselves up to whole new sponsors because they made a strong stand about who they stand for as a club. So that's just an example of aligning your values with your sponsors. Following on from that values based discussion, it's something we're starting to see more and more within industry and in community sport is especially large scale funders that they want to really make a stand in terms of if they're going to give funds and especially larger grants to community sport organisations that those businesses that are also associated with those community organisations stand for the right thing. So that's why I'm using Vic Health as an example here. Their healthy sport sponsorship. Their initiative in that space kind of really outlines that they obviously Vic Health want to promote participation in community sport as a way for people to be active, healthy, and socially connected. But a lot of sporting organisations and competitions have sponsorship arrangements with brands and companies who profit from products that are harmful to health and well-being, such as alcohol, unhealthy food, sugary drinks, and gambling. So they actually made the decision from the 1st of September last year that when you apply for a Vic Health grant, you actually might be required to complete a harmful industry relationship declaration. And this is a lot of the time in cases of funding of more than $35,000 or more. So obviously large scale funds, but it's worth noting that this is obviously something that's starting to come into the sporting industry is that if you are looking for grant funding, and that's something that is becoming more and more prevalent and more necessary for sport as a result of COVID, that you actually need to start showing that not only do you stand for the right things as a club, but the businesses and the organisations that you associate with and that you're tied with also stand for the right things. So something we wanted to note within that context. And within Vical's healthy sports sponsorship, some things that they've recommended you have a think about when deciding on a new sponsorship. And obviously, this is within the perspective of healthy relationships, being physically active, that kind of context. So does the sponsor promote a product or behaviour that is harmful to health and well-being? Who's the sponsor trying to reach with their brand, product, or message? Especially if it's children and young people, or if it's people that aren't actually associated with your club. Are they the right sponsor for you, or do their values, do what they're selling align with those particular demographics within your club? Similarly to the values and purpose of your organisation, along with the sponsor's values or messages, and to ask, are there sponsorship options within your community that do not promote the consumption of a harmful product? So, as I said at the start, obviously within the COVID context, most community clubs are kind of any sponsor is a good sponsor at the moment because the funds coming in the door are so needed. But going forward, if you can be strategic and selective in terms of your sponsorship options, it might make more sense from a branding perspective to look at, okay, well, who do we want to be tied with? What potential side effects are there going to be from having a sponsor that mightn't stand for the right things within the way that we want to be seen as a club? So another level from that, and some further things to think about. There are some ways that kind of harmful industries promote their brand or product that are more harmful than others because of that potential exposure. So examples of this are naming rights of events, competitions, branding on uniform and equipment, and especially within the communities, within the children's sport context as well. Banners and signage displayed across the facility grounds, something that's really visible when you arrive at the club's facilities, and people, not only those that are involved with the club itself, but those that are in clubs that are in the same competition. They're the first things that people are going to see kind of when you drive in the gate to potentially sponsors logos. So if they are kind of mixed messaging around who you stand for, around the values, that's something you have to really have a think about. All right, so the next step in the session is we're going to go through the ways that you approach sponsorship, and then within the context of kind of how do you find sponsors, how do you keep them happy, how do you retain them, and going forwards, how do you build on that relationship. So what we wanted to kind of note to start with is that we look at obviously two different approaches to sponsorship. Firstly is re-engaging or retaining your current sponsors. So you need to ask yourself within that context and within what we work through in the rest of the session, how do you keep your current sponsors happy? How do you ensure that they are seeing some return on investment, especially within the COVID context? And with the sponsors that you have good relationships with, are there opportunities to expand on that relationship, whether that's from the perspective of potentially extending the term of their sponsorship or potentially extending the level of their sponsorship? So can you potentially see an increase in the funds that they're going to invest in because you might be able to offer expanded sponsorable assets to them? The second element that we're going to look at in terms of the approach to sponsorship, obviously, is recruiting new sponsors or connecting with future potential sponsors. And that's a really important thing that we're going to note is don't just look at new sponsors for the right now and the immediate short term. Also have a look at finding that funnel of new sponsors moving into the future. It doesn't mean that you have to engage with them as sponsors for right now. It means that start building that relationship, start reaching out, inviting them to your events, making them aware of what you stand for as a club, so that when you do need to potentially reach out to them in the future, or where you think you're in a position to send them your sponsorship proposals, they've got a bit of an understanding as to who you are, and there is that bit more goodwill in terms of the relationship between the business and the sporting club. So within that context, ask yourself, who do you target? So what are the kind of businesses or individuals that you want to target as potential sponsors? What can you offer them as a club? And we're going to touch on sponsorable assets shortly. What do you require from them? And so whether that's funds, whether that's services, whether that's attending events, have a think about what do you require from a sponsor. And really importantly, how do you set the boundaries of the arrangement with the sponsorship? Obviously, we always hope that relationships you have with sponsors are really positive, but there is also an important element is to having some boundaries around that and some kind of formal arrangement in place around your sponsors. All right, so what we've done to help you in terms of your securing sponsors, keeping your sponsors happy, and obviously retaining sponsors, we've broken it down into a bit of a game plan. So 7 steps to this, and we're going to work through each of them on separate slides. So budgeting perspective, benefits and assets of figuring out what they are for you as a club, your sponsorship plan and what that looks like. Flowing from your plan is your sponsorship proposal, your package. Once you've secured your sponsors, hopefully the agreement that sits around that. And then once you're actually in the period of where you've got your sponsors on board, you're both seeing your mutual benefits, how do you report on your benefits, and then reviewing on the sponsorship arrangement at the end of it. So firstly, budgeting perspective, and this flows on really nicely from the last session delivered by More Australia around financial sustainability and obviously the benefits of budget. But within the context of sponsorship, look, it is really important to have a target in mind for the sponsorship funds you're aiming to secure. So is this itself built into your budget? Do you sit at the start of the year and think, okay, well, this is the target that we want to reach in terms of sponsorship funds, and this will help us in terms of the way that we want to operate and what we want to do within that particular financial year. It also helps from planning perspective, and for those that are responsible for securing the sponsorship, they have some kind of goals in mind as to what they're going to achieve. And especially for those seasonal clubs that kind of operate, it might be 6 months on, 6 months off. If you're starting to get costs that are coming in during what typically your down periods are, that you can then, if you've got that kind of budget or plan in mind as to what your funds look like and what periods you need them for, you might be able to potentially address some of those funding needs in the down periods through your sponsorship. If you can kind of have some kind of payment plan that works over rather than a lump sum up front over particular time periods that then meet the needs when you know you've got some down period in terms of on-field participation or what you typically do as a club. So as part of this, obviously ask yourself, what are the sponsorship funds being used to cover and what costs do you need to cover that? And as we touched on, what do payment terms look like? So what do you ideally need as a club? Is it okay for you just to say, okay, well, if we approach our sponsors typically in September, that we're happy for all our funds to come in October, just as big lump sum payments, and then we don't have any other sponsorship payments throughout the rest of the year? Or is it more financially responsible for us to have more of a trickle in terms of the funds? So they're broken down into quarterly payments, half-yearly payments, and monthly payments potentially, just so you can potentially have more of a consistent cash flow rather than one big lump sum and that's it for the year. Also, ask yourself from a budgeting perspective, what do you need in terms of potential benefits for you as a club? Obviously, typically they're going to be financial, that you need funds, but there might also be able to, as part of the budgeting process, ask, are there non-financial services that we actually might need? And when we look at the COVID context, we've seen obviously a lot of volunteers walk out the door. There were stats put out recently that said that 3 in 5 volunteers in community support haven't come back from COVID. So through this budgeting process, or a lot of the planning process, do we recognise that we might actually need to, through the businesses in our community, get some services in that help us operate as a club, whether it's from a financial perspective, legal perspective, marketing, range of different areas, that they give us benefit, not funds coming in the door, but services that help us operate. So the committee aren't then stretched to cover those areas as well. They can then focus their time and their energy and resources into the parts of the club operation that really need their kind of attention. So all the things that we can have a think about when we go through the process of budgeting and looking at the start of that period, what we need to do. The second part of the game plan that we put together, and it flows a little bit from the budgeting and really setting the groundwork, is what are the benefits or sponsorable assets that you can actually offer as a club? So once you have in mind a target of the financial and non-financial support that you're aiming to secure, then it's really important to actually prepare a bit of an audit of the sponsorable assets that you offer. So some examples of this are naming rights. So it might be an event, a section of your competition, particular teams, players, a trophy, your newsletter, or maybe obviously part of the facility. So common ones with that we see a particular court, a stand, scoreboard, potentially even having some kind of logo presence on the ground itself. There's some of the naming rights that you can see. More and more so, especially in the current age, is online brand presence. Especially those clubs that use social media and their websites really well, they can be really, really valuable assets that you can sell. So yeah, whether that be your website, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, different ways that you can then say to sponsors, look, this is something that we get huge amount of traction through. These are the kind of hits that we get within our website, within our social media. This is how valuable it can be in terms of having your brand presence on our kind of those online assets. Offline assets, so offline brand presence, it might be kind of the signs within your facility. You might have signs around your club's facility, uniforms, so on your playing uniforms, on your club's merchandise. It might be hoodies, t-shirts, beanies, those kind of things that when we talk about a uniform perspective. Stickers kind of fit within that as well. They're all things that you can potentially sell to sponsors as these are the numbers of hoodies that we typically sell. Would you like your business's logo on this for a particular cost? So have a think about within kind of your audit, what other assets fit within that. For those kind of businesses within your community that sell products, there might also be the opportunity within your club's operations for them to actually sell their products, whether it's at a bar, your canteen, club events, game days. You might see that there is opportunity for them to, if it's over the canteen, obviously selling food and drink, but can they sell their product? Does it fit within what you are able to do and what you stand for? Can they sell their product through that as well? That might be something you can sell. And just as importantly, it might be something that gets often overlooked, but just your general club presence. If for them, they see real value in just being around the club, so being invited to functions, being at game days. Obviously, if they can actually kind of, if they're happy to put in funds because they know they're going to get invited to events, and that gives them the chance to be around people within the community, be around people in the club, that they can be seen to kind of having that community presence, that might be enough for them to say that we're happy to put in funds because we see real benefit of just being a presence around the club. And within that as well, there might be the opportunity, especially you see with kind of younger people or younger people within business kind of developing, whether it's they're coming into graduate roles or moving up, that businesses themselves see real benefit in those kind of people getting personal development opportunities through being involved in community organisations. Sporting clubs are no different than that. So you can potentially offer some of these young leaders the chance to get really valuable skills through sitting in leadership positions in your club. And that might be enough for a business to say, look, we're happy to sponsor the club if we can have some kind of people involved within the leadership as well. So that's, again, another asset that you can potentially sell. Once you've kind of done that audit, really, really important to actually keep a register of these different assets. And it should be detailed around kind of what you think the value of that asset is. And if you then sell that asset to someone as part of a sponsorship arrangement, keeping up-to-date details of that. So you know at any particular period of time what you have got available to potentially sell to someone. If someone walks into your door and says, we're a new business there, we really want to be involved with your club, we'd love to sponsor, what can we potentially get us some benefits? You can really quickly go to your list of assets and say, okay, well, this is what we've actually got to offer at this point in time, and start to keep note of that. Another thing to consider, the last thing we've noted on this slide is there can be kind of exclusive arrangements around sponsorship. So keep that in mind when you're putting together your sponsorable assets, whether you want to have that as a potentially exclusive arrangement or not. So potentially, like signage is a good example. That signage, you might go to a sporting club and see that there's 30 or 40 different sponsor signs around the venue, but there might be one sponsor that just wants their sign on the scoreboard. They don't want to have other signs up on the scoreboard, and that might mean that instead of giving $20,000 to do so, that was just a random figure, they might be happy for an exclusive right to say, okay, well, we're happy to put in $30,000. So have a think about what you can potentially sell as an exclusive right and what kind of sits as, well, it has to be non-exclusive because of the arrangement we've already got in place. Okay, so you've now got a budget in mind in terms of what you need as a club, and you've also got a list of the assets that you can actually offer or sell. So the next step is preparing a sponsorship plan that ties all of that together for a particular period of time, whether that is for the upcoming season, whether it's for a financial year, whether it's for a calendar year. It depends on how you want to operate as a club. But your sponsorship plan should really cover off within that who you are potentially going to target. So a list of kind of businesses or individuals that you're going to target as a club as part of your sponsorship plan for that period. What you're going to potentially include in your sponsorship packages as part of that period of time. So what can you offer as part of your sponsorable assets? What packages might you want to build around that? So what kind of things do you want to include within potentially a tier 1, so your highest level of sponsorship, your tier 2, your tier 3. So you can have kind of different levels and what each sponsor might receive as part of those levels. As part of that plan as well, have a think about the length of your sponsorships. And Paul and the team from More Australia talked about kind of risk management and how risk averse or comfortable you are to sit with certain risk as a club, and that can flow within the length of your sponsorships as well. Obviously, if you are more comfortable to kind of say, look, we're happy to offer just 12-month contracts to all our sponsors, there might be increased risk in that with a short-term sponsorship arrangement, that all those sponsors might walk out the door at the end of that 12-month period, and you don't have as much time to try and find the next ones to fill that void. So you might be a club that has to move to more towards, we need longer term sponsors. We need people for kind of 2, 3, 4 years, so that we can have the length of time to then find the next funnel of sponsors, because we just think it's too much risk to have short-term arrangements. So have a think about what you can actually do as a club from a risk perspective in terms of the length of the sponsorships. And then within your sponsorship plan as well, think about who's actually responsible for the management of all your sponsorship arrangements. Is that does it sit with the committee more broadly? Does it sit with a couple of individuals within the committee? Does it sit with people outside the committee? So can you potentially appoint a sponsorship coordinator? Do you have a bit of a mix of all of them? So you've got a sponsorship coordinator that reports into someone on the committee that their responsibility is more around the general oversight of sponsorship as well. A range of different ways you can approach it, but at least having it clear as to how you are going to manage your sponsorships more generally within the club. And I will say, in terms of having someone responsible for management, that is really important as part of that process, to look within your club. That can be a chance to either from a succession planning perspective, it might be the chance to get someone in to sit on a kind of coordinator position where they're not on the committee, but it gives them the chance to actually build up some skills, some confidence around, okay, well, I'm part of a leadership position within the club. They do that for a couple of years, and then they've got more confidence to then step up into a committee role. So from a succession perspective, it can be really important and really useful to use it like that. And it can also be really useful to look internally at the skill sets that already exist in your club. So you might have people that are players, people that are volunteers, people that are parents that have a particular background in business or in marketing or maybe sponsorship within their day-to-day job as well. So they might be more comfortable and have that skill set to then act in that same kind of role within your club. So always there is a benefit in looking internally. And we've included on this slide a link to a sample sponsorship policy from our Club Help website. Sponsorship policies can be really useful to kind of set the rules for how you as a club want to approach sponsorship. So you can, within that, kind of set, this is what we obviously stand for. These are the kind of sponsorships that we want to target. These are the period of times, the length of the sponsorships that we want to go with. So it can kind of actually, if you as a committee agree on this is our sponsorship policy, that you then pass to the sponsorship coordinator, okay, well, operate within this kind of policy because this is what we've agreed, this is what we want to stand for. So they can be really useful in that context as well. All right, so within the context of planning as well, and when we're looking at who to target in terms of the types of sponsors, it's really important to consider what the different types of sponsors actually want. And we've got 3 different examples here on the screen. So look, firstly, retail and service, they're always going to kind of want increased interest in their own business, and obviously sales is part of that as well. So if it's something like a pub, they want more people in the door. If it's someone that sells products, they want to sell more of that product. So you have to then have a think about, if we want to target that sponsor and they want to see some benefits themselves from investing funds in the sporting club, what can you potentially offer them that meets that need? So if it is kind of a sales perspective, can they sell their product within your club's operations? Can you, if they're putting their logo on club uniforms, are they expecting because of that there's an increased awareness of the brand that then leads to sales? So really have a think about, if you are targeting a particular type of, especially in the retail and service perspective, what they actually want from that. Similarly, obviously, the corporate side of things, sometimes that they will sponsor purely for a tax benefit. So that they can see kind of tax deductions from sponsoring not-for-profit organisations such as community sports clubs, or they might want to just be seen to be socially responsible or improve their image because they're seen to be involved in the local community. That they might be less inclined to really be after benefits coming back their way, because the benefit for them is purely because of the fact that they're associated with a community organisation. So be aware of that as well. And there are especially in some areas, there are individuals that sponsor sporting clubs. So from their perspective, a lot of the time that they just want to give back, but the benefits that they see is that real connection. So if you're looking at what you can offer them, what are ways that you can really make sure that you not only maintain that connection, but potentially increase the connection, and they really feel valued because they are giving back to the club, that they really feel that the club, they can see the appreciation that the club gets, or that the club sees in their involvement they have with it. So it's just an example of the different types of sponsors that you might look to engage and the different types of benefits that they might want to see. All right, so building off the sponsorship plan that we've developed, so we have an idea, obviously, the kind of targets we want to hit. We have an idea of what we're looking to sell, and we understand the kind of businesses or people that we want to target as part of our sponsorship plan. You can then go through the process of actually designing the proposal that can be circulated to targeted businesses or individuals for opportunities. It's important to think about, when we're designing a proposal, have a think about, will you prepare a targeted proposal for a particular business or individual? Will you have a more generic proposal with different packages to choose from? Or will you potentially even have a combination of both? So maybe for your larger scale sponsorship packages and your larger scale assets that you're looking to sell, you might be more targeted as part of that. And if you're looking to target bigger businesses that you can see potentially are more likely to invest more funds, that you really need to be specific in what you're going to offer them, what they can offer you, and what's included within that. Whereas potentially your lower tier proposals kind of more can fit within that generic proposal and generic packages. So really have a think about how that will look in terms of what your sponsorship proposal actually is designed in, and who you're looking to target as part of that. Once you've kind of figured out the type of proposal that you're looking to develop, then really look at what you're actually going to include in that proposal. So especially for potentially businesses that don't know a lot about your club, or for the bigger scale packages that you're looking to put together, or the bigger scale businesses that you're looking to secure arrangements with, it is really useful to really show who you are as a club and give information at the club. So build that connection through photos, testimonials, branding, put all the color kind of schemes of your club in it, club logos, all that kind of stuff that really gives them, they pick it up and they know kind of straight away the kind of club that you are and what you stand for. And so you can potentially hook them in straight away because they say, oh, this is a club that aligns with kind of our values and what we stand for as a business. Within the proposal as well, outline why you need that support. So they can pretty quickly see that there is actually a need for it. It's not just a cash grab. It's not just we want more money because we just think we need more money. There is actually a really need for sponsors within our club operations. What's the request that sits as far that? What are you asking for from them? And whether there is a tiered approach to the sponsorship. So are you looking at kind of large scale sponsorship down to the lower tiers, or is it more generic that it's more general that you kind of take it as a case by case basis? Within your proposal as well, don't be afraid to set the length of the arrangement that you're looking to secure, because at least you make it pretty clear and it's upfront as to what, if they're going to make a commitment, what that might look like. And obviously as part of that as well, what you're going to be offering within particular packages, what potential benefits the sponsor can receive. And obviously don't be afraid as part of that as well. If you've got some really good sponsors within your club already, don't be afraid to get some testimonials from them, not just testimonials about your club, but testimonials from your sponsors about the benefits that they might have seen from sponsoring your club. Because word of mouth is obviously going to be one thing, but if you can really clearly outline to a potential sponsor, this is, whether it's numeric data, whether it's just a quote, that they can really say, okay, yep, this is someone that's probably been in a similar position to us. This is what they've seen from being involved in this club. We can make a bit more of an informed decision about whether we want to go down that path or not. And we noted lastly, kind of the benefits of the club, that obviously there is, don't be afraid to kind of set that out as well, that you are going to see obviously as a club benefits and potentially outside the cash. So don't just say obviously that we need funds, but if you're happy to kind of outline what the funds are going to be used for, they can kind of see, oh, there's some kind of social responsibility about the use of our funds. It's not just funds that go into the bank. It is actually being used for certain reasons. So that can be really beneficial as well. And we've also included a link here to a sponsorship proposal template from our Club Help website. So if you haven't kind of put together a sponsorship proposal before, I'd highly recommend having a look at that, seeing what it entails, and then try and kind of tailor it for your own purposes as well. All right, step 5. So we've gone through all the steps. So we've budgeted, we've done the audit, we understand what we're trying to sell, we've put the plan together around all of that, and the proposal's now gone out to our targeted sponsors. Hopefully we've now secured a few of them. So yeah, as I said, congratulations on this page. Hopefully you've landed a really valuable sponsor for your club. But now the next steps are also really important as part of that process as well. So it is really important that you have an agreed framework, whether that be a formal agreement, and we say kind of formal agreements for the larger scale sponsors, for the bigger clubs. You might want a bit more of a detailed agreement, or for the smaller sponsorships or the smaller clubs, at least a basic document that's agreed by both parties. And you have that in place for how the sponsorship arrangement will work. So within that, have a think about and documenting what will each party receive. Is it funds for the club? What benefits will the sponsor receive? And be really specific about that within your kind of your documented framework of the agreement. These things that will typically be outlined in the proposal first, and whether it's through kind of phone conversations, face-to-face conversations, email conversations, it will kind of have been agreed over time, but then actually formally document that in some form of agreement. Have as part of that the payment terms. So at least you then get clarity as a club and you have some kind of understanding, and obviously within the context of our financial stream that we're discussing here, you have some more confidence around what your cash flow looks like. So you can set in stone, are we going to get paid up front? Are we going to get paid over smaller packages or smaller payments over a period of time? And building into that as well, the length of the sponsorship. So understanding, okay, if it's a 3-year sponsorship, are we going to get all of the money for that 3-year benefit period up front? So using the example of that, if the sponsor is going to have a sign up around the club for 3 years, but they pay for that just once, at least document that so you know that as a club. Or are they going to potentially pay the same amount over 6 different payments, kind of half yearly across that 3-year period? So having that documented gives you some more clarity, and from a financial perspective gives you more confidence in terms of the cash flow and how you can then budget around that as well. And look, it's a bit of an ugly one to discuss, but it's something that from a risk management perspective is something that we need to outline, is build into that kind of document the ability to potentially terminate the arrangement if you need be. Hopefully you don't get to that point, but especially from a branding perspective and an image perspective, it happens from time to time that businesses go through issues. They have their own problems. Those problems might become public. They might be something that you get to the point where you think, hang on, this business no longer aligns with our values. You want to have the right, if possible, to kind of terminate the arrangement. So using that sign example again, that if that business is then seen as having a poor image in the area, you don't want to have to then be tied to having that sign around your club for the next 3 years because you've agreed to that in terms of sponsorship arrangement. So having the ability to terminate if need be can be really important. They'll probably ask for the same thing from you, obviously, as a club, that they don't want to be tied with a club that is seen as having a poor image, but that's part of having some kind of mutual benefit as part of the relationship. So would recommend that if in terms of that risk management process. All right, so now we're at the point where we're actually underway in terms of our sponsorship arrangement. So you're getting the benefits from the sponsors, and they're getting their agreed benefits as well from you as a club. It's really important you build in some kind of reporting mechanisms now that you actually are underway as well. Look, whether the sponsors report back to you on kind of their benefits, at least you as a club take responsibility and ownership of what you report back to your sponsors, because, and especially within the context of COVID, sponsors are becoming more and more aware, obviously, of the money that they're outlaying, because they've been impacted just as much in some instances as sport has in terms of their financial position from COVID. So they want to really see that they're getting a return on their investment. So as a club, look at ways that you can really capture data to show this as part of your reporting process. Example of this, because it is a really easy way to do it, if you are kind of selling your online platforms as part of a sponsorship package, so whether it's your sponsors are having presence on your social media platforms, with Facebook or Instagram, or their logos on your website, or different elements of within your website, pages within your website. There are obviously ways that you can track how many viewers you're getting to your website or to Facebook or Instagram. Especially within Facebook, that there are really simple insight tools that show the amount of views, the amount of clicks, the amount of kind of engagement with certain posts, especially if that's a sponsored post. That's something that you can include within some kind of report that goes back to the sponsors to show in really clear terms the kind of benefit that they might be able to get because you've had a certain amount of eyes that have then seen their brand in some way. In terms of the report itself, there can be a range of different ways that you can approach that, and look, that can vary on the size of sponsorship. So obviously, if you've got a large scale sponsor that invested quite a bit of funds, put a bit more time and energy and effort into the way that you report back. So that might be kind of a bit more of a detailed report, might be kind of a 3 or 4 page report that outlines some of the benefits and the status of the sponsorship arrangement, down to it might be a simple email at a lower level sponsor. They're just as important because they've obviously invested funds, but also you can still give them the information that they need without having to put as much time and energy into that. Just as importantly, from a reporting perspective, is the time points that you do it. So highly recommend to put in the calendar regular time points to check in with your sponsors to make sure that they're obviously happy with how the arrangement is working. Whether, again, there can be different levels of the type of ways that you check in, whether that's a simple phone call, email, or whether it is actually going down to your sponsor's office or their business, whether it's arranging for a coffee, lunch, dinner, whatever that might look like, depends on the type of sponsor and your relationship with them. But making sure you're actually doing that at regular time points. And whether that's the person that's responsible for managing the sponsorship arrangement, or whether that, especially for some of your bigger sponsors, it might be even the president or really significant leaders within the club, players, coaches, they actually take the time to check in with the sponsors and make sure that the relationship is still at a good level. And we say in that context as well, obviously, if, and we don't hope most clubs don't get to this point, if for some reason there is a bit of there is some frustration, confusion, or anything with the way a sponsorship arrangement is working, much better to be able to knock that on the head soon and get on top of it quickly, rather than getting to the end of the sponsorship term, going to your sponsor and asking, hey, are you willing to reinvest? And they say, oh, no, not really, because we weren't happy with this, and we weren't approached about any of it. They're more likely to walk out the door. So at least if you are having those regular check-ins, you've got the chance to actually knock those kind of things on the head if they do arise. And look, the last step in our sponsorship game plan is the review process. A little bit different to reporting. So reporting is, I guess, the more regular interactions that you have that kind of give the feedback on how, at any certain point in time, how the relationship's going, what the benefits are looking like, flowing both ways. The review process is more kind of when you get towards the end of your sponsorship plan period, whether that's a calendar year, season, financial year, or the sponsorship term. Have a look at and guess take stock of where you're positioned as a club with your sponsorship arrangements. So have a think about what can you do to lock in sponsors for longer terms potentially. Have a look at your audit that you've put together of your sponsorable assets, and have a think about maybe what else you could sell. Can you add to that list? Do you need to potentially look for sponsors in different areas or move away from certain current sponsors? That might be because they might have kind of shifted in terms of their values, their operations, that start to move away from who you stand for. It might be simply because you have now as a club engaged a whole new demographic of people through a particular service, and that you now need to kind of have sponsors that might more closely align with that, or that you might have opened yourself up to a whole new area of sponsors because you have that different demographic within your club. So take the time to actually have a think and do that review of where you then sit as a club. Also importantly, as part of that, take the time to discuss what you've actually learned from your previous sponsorship plans and proposals. So you shouldn't have to reinvent the wheel each year or each period. If you've got things that worked really well from your last sponsorship plan or proposal, look to take them forward. If there were things that didn't work so well, they're the ones that you can kind of tweak. So actually take the time to look back on what you'd agreed on previously and what you put together previously, and look to just tweak it rather than completely throw them out the door and start again. And obviously we touched on it in terms of the reporting side of things, but it's also a good chance to take a more holistic view of what your sponsor's feedback is. That might be the chance to send out a sponsor survey just to see where they're positioned. It doesn't need to be just in the context of where they're positioned from sponsorship with the club. It might be just a general kind of how you're going as a business conversation as well, because that will give you some really important insights as to where you might be able to potentially look to engage with the sponsor for either more money and that might be through different assets that they're willing to potentially look to sponsor, or it might be for the longer period. So you can start to get a bit of a sense as to where you might be positioned with particular sponsors through that feedback survey. And we've got, again, another template, a link here on this page to one of our template sponsor surveys that you can look to have a look at and potentially adapt for your own circumstances. The next few slides, I just want to touch on some different sponsorship examples we've seen in different ways that both sporting clubs and businesses have kind of leveraged each other's brands in positive ways. And look, the first one I want to touch on, Bowenheads Football Netball Club, a club down in the Geelong region. Obviously, this post was quite a serious post in terms of the fact that it was a COVID-related post, that there had been a decision made that that football wasn't going to go ahead that weekend because of the COVID situation. Within that, you can see quite clearly that there is front and center. One of the club sponsors has obviously had their branding on club merchandise, and it's a simple photo of one of the coaches with that logo of the business right front and center. And the club's also tagged the sponsor in the post. So the post itself was going to get a lot of traction because it was quite a significant post. and a really simple way to build in some leveraging of a sponsor's brand within that context as well. So that would have got a lot of hits. Obviously, it did have quite a few views, and very, very easy to report back to that sponsor and say, look, obviously within the context of the post, quite a serious post, it wasn't particularly about the sponsor itself, but there's have been quite a few eyes on this that have then seen the sponsor's logo. Another example here, and there's actually two different sponsorship examples within the one picture here. So on the actual scoreboard itself, you can see that there is a player sponsorship arrangement. So the club's arranged for each player to be sponsored, that then feeds funds back into the club. And then there is a business sponsorship for the actual scoreboard below that as well. So again, an example of a few different ways. Very simple club facility. Most clubs have got some kind of scoreboard in some capacity, or some kind of, whether it's signs on fences or different ways that you can kind of have sponsorship shown around your facilities, and the different ways that you might be able to leverage that too. This example here is of ways that you can start to, I guess, get some interest or start the conversation around getting some interest in sponsoring a club. And this was a post from a cricket club's social media platform. So very simply, it is a mini sponsorship proposal in some senses, in that that you're kind of selling the benefits of sponsoring the club, and also obviously got some contact details. But this was just a one-page flyer that, as I said, was on the social media platforms. And again, it's showing some benefits of the club, a good picture of people involved with the club, nice colour schemes around it. Very, very simple, but it at least starts to get that awareness around ways that businesses can be involved in clubs. And look, the last example I want to show you here, and a lot of clubs probably have similar posts, at least, that they'll have on their social media platforms or potentially on their websites. And so a lot of clubs will probably have the same way that they potentially demonstrate their sponsors. But for those that don't, this is a really simple way to, and look, we will say a lot of these sponsors potentially might be even lower tier sponsors. Some of them, this might be part of a broader package that they might have 6 or 7 different assets that they've kind of included as part of their package, and this is just one of them that it's on kind of flyers that the club put out. But you can quite clearly see this is just promotion of a club game day, and they've got 6 different sponsors along the bottom of the screen. So very simple and easy way to kind of show off your sponsors. And again, because it's on the social media platforms, clubs can really easily track how many views that post has had, how many potentially people have clicked on links as part of that post. So very easy to be able to report back to sponsors that have been included on that the amount of kind of views and potentially likes, all those kind of things that they've had, that the club has been associated with, and that the sponsors obviously been associated with as well. Within the live workshop on this topic, we had some really interesting insights from members of community sporting clubs within the City of Monash municipality, and we'd really like to share them with you to give you some more understanding of what's going on within your own community. So firstly, you'll hear from Donald from the Oakley Tennis Club, and secondly, Brian from the South Oakley Bowls Club.
Yeah, we've got a formal, we're trying to get all of our 8 courts sponsored. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty specific, because with a tennis club, you've got courts that you can put up, the windscreens at the back. And so they're a good place to put sponsorship. But yeah, we've tried to spell out what the club's about, why we need the sponsorship, what you get for your money, all that sort of stuff. So, yeah.
We've had a number of, we've still got quite a few sponsors, but we have lost a few because of COVID.
Yep.
And but what, as a club, we've decided to do, although we're not getting any benefit from these sponsors this year, we're still offering them benefits from our side, because we're a bowling club. We have a lot of organisations that may sponsor us, and part of the deal is that they'll have functions at our place for barefoot bowls, primarily around about Christmas time in particular. So we've offered those people the same benefits without getting any benefit from them, because we're looking at a long-term thing. So that mightn't work for everybody, but the way we look at it is, if you've had sponsors for a couple of years and it's only COVID that's interrupted the process, well, they're probably worth hanging on to if you're able to.
Look, in terms of content for the session, I just want to finish off with some really final tips to wrap things up. Look, one of the first things I said was that for most clubs at the moment, especially with COVID, any sponsorship funds are going to be really hard to turn away, because participation's been affected, volunteers have been affected, a lot of sponsors have walked out the door. So those that are willing to stick by clubs or come and support clubs, it's very hard to turn away. But we would still urge clubs, especially as you bounce forward, to still have some kind of strategy and thought processes that you give to who you actually target as a club. So who, as a potential sponsor, has similar values and directions for the way you're heading as a club. What kind of sponsorship arrangements are going to be good for your club's image, and conversely, obviously, what isn't. So whilst at the moment you might be saying yes to every sponsor that's coming in, can you potentially get yourself to a point where you can be a bit more selective, and the sponsors that you have, and you have confidence in the fact that they all align with what you represent as a club. Obviously, we'll touch on a few different points, but take the time to actually prepare a list of sponsorable items that you can offer as a club and do that audit. And really importantly, to keep that updated. You want to make sure that you have an idea of what's really valuable to offer, have an idea, and whether that's through conversations that you have with other sports, other clubs within the same sport, your state sport bodies, have an idea of kind of within the assets that you have to offer, what each of them's kind of worth. And that might be hard to kind of figure out to start with, but as you kind of build on it, as you have conversations, as year by year, you kind of you have those different arrangements. You have the sponsorable items list that you've got. You'll get a bit more of an understanding as to what each thing's worth, which is really important for you to have as a club. If possible, and again within the context of a lot of volunteers walking out the door, but moving forward and as we bounce forward, if possible, have someone in your club that their sole responsibility is around managing sponsorships. That might be because that's their particular skill set. It might be because you're looking to have some kind of succession planning. It might be someone that's still on the committee, but you have more kind of delegated roles within the committee. It just means that they know that that's what their responsibilities are. You know who to turn to within your club when you need to have the discussion around sponsorships. And it is really clear from the perspective of sponsors looking to reach out to clubs and having that relationship going both ways, that there is that clear contact point, which is really important. And we will say within the context of that, it's important that person still documents. And when we said kind of one of the big challenges is around record keeping, really, really important that you are making sure that they actually keep accurate records, because if they leave for some reason, you want someone to be able to kind of fill that void really quickly without having to start from ground one because records weren't kept. And the last one that we've noted here is really important to regularly connect with current or potential sponsors to at least have an ongoing conversation. As I said, having conversations with other businesses doesn't mean that you have to have conversations because you want them to sponsor you now. There can be real value in having a conversation with a business just to build a relationship, because you see in a couple of years' time, they could actually be a really good sponsor for your club. So build that goodwill, have them around the club more often, build that relationship. So when you actually do go to them and make that targeted approach, that they're much more familiar with the club. They can kind of make that informed decision really quickly as to, yeah, this is something we're actually happy to do because we know what this club stands for. We agree, we're on the same page. This all sounds good, and they can make that quick decision. So real benefit in keeping that contact and conversation going with obviously your current sponsors, but your potential sponsors too. I've not only touched on this within this session itself, but throughout the series, our Club Help website, we've got a range of different resources, templates and guides that for not only obviously financial side of things, but from general governance, marketing, participation, volunteers, a range of different areas in terms of the management of a sports club. Highly recommend you check it out because we've designed it to kind of give you the templates and the guides that you need that can help with operations rather than you having to reinvent the wheel yourself. Look, to wrap up the session, again, I just want to thank you all for attending, whether it was just tonight's workshop or whether it was all the workshops in the series, and congratulate you all for what you're doing to really look to put your club in a great position to bounce forward from the COVID-19 pandemic and obviously the issues that have been faced over the last 2 years. And we really, again, acknowledge the support and City of Monash for putting on this series. We will share a brief survey that we'd really love some feedback from, but if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and thank you again for your involvement in this stream.